Welcome to the Long COVID podcast with me, Jackie Baxter. I am really excited to bring you today's episode. Please do check out the links in the show notes where you can find the podcast website, social media and support group, as well as a link to buy me a coffee if you are able. You should not rely on any medical information contained in this podcast and related materials in making medical, health-related or other decisions. Please do consult a doctor or other health professional. I love to hear from you. If you've got any suggestions or feedback or just want to say hey, then please do get in touch. I really hope you enjoy this episode, so here we go. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Long COVID podcast. I am super excited to welcome back Jules Rogers tonight. Jules shared her recovery story we've just discovered about a year ago. So everything has aligned to bring us together a year on. And today we're going to dive into the topic of boundaries, something that I certainly never knew the existence of before I got ill. So I'm super excited to find out where we end up here. So a really warm welcome back to the podcast, Jules. It's so nice to see you.
It's so lovely to be back. It's really great. So I've been running a kind of 6-week course for people to recover. Like I've called it Start Your Chronic Fatigue Recovery. And as I was kind of planning the sessions, it really dawned on me that boundaries are so important. And I don't think I did much about boundaries. So I thought, this is such an essential part of the recovery process. So I dedicate a whole week just to how we set boundaries, and what boundaries even are was the first place to start, because they weren't really existing very well in my life before I got ill. And then working out how we set them, how we deal with that, and kind of how we carry them on throughout our life.
Absolutely, because that was going to be my first question as well. Because you make a beautiful point there. Boundaries are something we learn out of necessity when we're not well, but they are an essential part of living well. And I have boundaries in my life now that I didn't really realize I needed before. So it's definitely part of the learning, I think, for me. So yeah, let's start there. What is a boundary?
I would say a boundary is something you consciously put in place so that you are making sure your energy is maintained and that you're not giving too much beyond what feels right for you in that moment, so that kind of energy are able to replenish the energy that's given out by doing something, and you give time for that energy to be replenished. And they're things that you need. So they can be like physical boundaries, they could be emotional boundaries, financial boundaries, mental boundaries, time bound. There's so many different kinds of boundaries that we can put in place just so that we can protect our energy and our needs as well, to make sure we meet our own needs and we're not just giving too much.
Yeah, totally. And I think, that last thing you said there, that, meeting our needs is so important. In fact, there's a post-it that is still on my wall that says, what are your needs? Because that's something I have to remind myself of daily, because I am that person that will give too much of myself because I want to help people, or I want things to be right, or whatever that reason is. So yeah, I think that's such a nice way of putting it. And you mentioned all these different sorts of boundaries. There were some that you mentioned there that I hadn't thought of, actually. So what might be a good idea is to maybe give a few examples of some of these.
So something like a kind of a physical boundary is, I would explain it as like, how comfortable do you feel with people being close? Are you a hugger? Are you not a hugger? And being respectful of that, and being okay to kind of put a hand in if you're not a hugger, and just, or say, oh, I'd rather not, it's like, it's lovely to meet you, but to be okay to put that boundary in place and not feel bad about it. I think we can get to later talking about, because that one of the hardest things I think about setting boundaries is dealing with that uncomfortableness of setting boundaries.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that is kind of a whole discussion in itself. To actually be able to instill them is the discomfort that comes along with them. So that would be, I say, an example of a physical boundary. Like an emotional boundary could be, if others are feeling very emotional, they're wanting your time, they're wanting help to, like, with issues they have in their life, like, do you have the emotional capacity to be able to help them at that moment? Have you got enough to give? And if you haven't, to be able to say, honestly, I can see that this is a real issue for you, but at the moment, I'm sorry, I don't have that capacity to be able to help you, because you need to have that knowledge and that compassion for yourself that you can't deplete yourself to help somebody else. Another one, like something, it could be like a material boundary of, like, for example, you could have somebody that wants to borrow money from you or your car or something like that, and you don't really want to lend it, or they borrowed your car last time and they never put any petrol in it. And so they're boundaries around material things that you kind of need to know what your boundary is around that, and kind of say those kind of things up front. Mental boundaries can be that kind of, how much mental energy do you have for something? Like if you're discussing something with somebody, it's kind of, you might not have the same opinions on it, but just be okay to be like, you'll have your opinion, I have mine opinion, and that's okay, and to be able to stand on that. And another big one, I think, too, is probably time. So only kind of agree to doing things if it's not depleting you and your energy. So say your friend wants help, I don't know, maybe moving the house or something, which is quite a big, and it's like that, I'd love to help you, and I can, but be really clear on how much time you have to do that, and not, again, overgive on your time. So I think they're kind of some good examples of different kinds of boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. As you were saying that, I was thinking, yeah, these are the things that I sometimes notice that I let slip, particularly the time one. I'm terrible at the time one.
Mm.
So, it's these, yeah, everyone will probably be sort of having their own sort of examples bouncing around, as you've given some of those examples. Oh, yeah, I do that. Yeah, I think that was really helpful. And, obviously, we said boundaries are important for everybody. And there's something I still, as I said, practice in my day-to-day life now. And yeah, we sort of learn them as a sort of necessity, or sort of sometimes self, boundaries that almost kind of make themselves. Someone asks you to do something and you're like, well, I really want to and I'm going to try, but I actually literally can't lift my head off the pillow today. And sometimes we will actually try to force ourselves to do things because we don't want to say that we can't. So when we then put this into the sort of long COVID MECFS space, this whole boundary thing becomes possibly more important, doesn't it? In order to, I suppose, preserve energy for getting better.
Yeah, I would say it's so important, because it's like that feeling of, I should do this, because I've not actually done anything all day today. I've had to ask people to help me with this, or my I have people doing this for me and that for me, and I should do something, but actually it's a day where you can't do anything. And it's about respecting that boundary of, like, today, this is just for now, this day, I can't do anything. And to just stand by that and just be accepting of that, which is incredibly difficult to stand by. And you just feel guilty, and it's so hard to I know for myself, when I find accepting help really difficult. So it was like every time I was having to face this thing that I found so difficult to ask for help, because that's weakness. Not that it is, but that is the image and that would been in my head. The belief that I had was, I'm showing weakness by having to keep asking for help. I can't stand on my own 2 feet. So I'm having to the whole time face this challenge of my kind of pattern of thought and that limiting belief I've had, while also being exhausted and just, yeah, dealing with so much stuff going on in the head. I think it's a lot to be able to try and process and deal with and execute as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the word should, it's such an enemy, isn't it?
Yeah,
When we find ourselves shoulding, I should be this, I should be that. Well, says who?
yeah.
But these things, they're ingrained in us from childhood, probably, whether it's something we picked up from an adult or society or whatever, and showing weakness, as you say, I feel that very strongly as well. And I notice it in myself,
Mm.
but I still do it.
Yeah,
We're British. We don't show weakness, and I'm sure it's a trait that a lot of other people will recognize in themselves too. And it's so hard. And, I think often, even if we do manage to set those boundaries, we will still then beat ourselves up for it. So it's not enough to set the boundary in itself. It's that actually we've got to find a way to somehow be okay with that.
yeah. And hold that boundary of, like, because it takes courage to set it and hold it and have that, know that you're doing this thing for myself, which will help me heal. But dealing with all those messages and all those voices in your head that are going, you're letting people down, you're doing this, you're doing that, and to just be able to sit with those almost and let them pass. And then the more you do it with everything, really, it's creating that new neural pathway. By doing it, the more you do it, the easier it gets, because it becomes familiar. And you get the evidence of, like, oh yeah, but when I did do it and I got through that uncomfortableness and the discomfort of setting it got easier. Because people then, if I say it a few times, they're like, don't expect the old me to, they have to have that time to adjust to the new me and the nuances that they're going to get. So I think it's that having patience and time just to sit with that discomfort and let it kind of flow out and kind of be what it is.
Yeah, totally. And I think, that whole, we you mentioned guilt earlier, and I remember thinking the same, that it's selfish to put yourself first. And being selfish is something that we've always been told is something that we shouldn't be. And I remember the analogy of the oxygen masks on the plane
Mm.
really helped me. But I never understood that before. I got on the plane and they do the safety demonstration and they're like, always put on your mask before helping others. And I'm like, well, why would you do that? Surely you would help someone else if they were struggling. And you could put yours own one on afterwards. And it makes so much more sense to me now. It's like, well, you're no use to other people if you don't take care of yourself. And I
Yeah.
think, that's so much more evident maybe in recovery, because particularly people who do have caring responsibilities outside of themselves, you got to look after your kids. But yeah, you still got to look after yourself first. But it must be incredibly difficult.
I think, yes, it is. It's incredibly difficult. And I think parenting guilt is just massive anyway. And then you put illness on top of it, it's like you really add to the guilt even more. Um, so it's creating that kind of self-compassion for yourself, that which I think is quite an alien concept within our culture, of like being able to be kind to yourself and put yourself first. Like you're saying, it's that selfishness. But if we can't kind of put our needs first, we can't serve others. And I got to the point with my recovery, with my illness, not my recovery, with my illness, where I made a really strong commitment that I was going to put getting better above everything else. It's like almost like you've got to get to the bottom of like the worst bit to like then make that commitment. And that's when my biggest boundary came into place of like, right, my health and getting better is the most important thing. And I'd reached that point where I knew if I put that as a boundary, I would be able to help my family and I would be able to not have those feelings of being a burden and all that. But I knew in the short term, it was going to be difficult and I was going to almost become more of a burden. Maybe that's kind of how I envisaged it in my head. I'm not sure I was, but I had that slight image in my head that I would be. But yeah, once I'd made that strong commitment, it kind of was easier to uphold that boundary. And I used to have a mantra in my head. Once I made that commitment, I put a mantra in my head. So if somebody asked me something like, I don't know, do you want to go out for a coffee? It would be like, is this going to help me heal? And if I couldn't say yes to that statement, I said, I'm just going to say no. And I missed out on a lot of things, but ultimately I got well and I've been able to do so many more coffees and everything in the since then. But it kind of took, I had to get to a certain place to be able to put that really strong boundary in place.
That makes a lot of sense to me as well, because I spent a lot of time doing all the wrong things to start with. And I pushed and I pushed and I pushed and I pushed and I pushed. And then eventually I had a sort of one of the worst weeks I'd had. It was absolutely awful and, kind of did hit rock bottom in some ways. And that was the point where I said, right, this isn't working. I need to try something different. And, the journey was still pretty non-linear after that. But, I think, that idea of
Yeah.
kind of, you have to hit a pretty low point before you put a boundary in or you start to look elsewhere or you explore, whatever it is that you kind of turn that corner in. I think often that does come from that kind of lowest moment, which is pretty brutal, isn't it? But maybe just gives you a different perspective or something.
It's almost like I didn't see it coming. It wasn't that I was like, I felt I was sliding and sliding, and there it was weird. It was just like something changed in my head. And I don't know whether I got angry or I got, in all honesty, I can't remember all the emotions that went with that decision, or whether I just got to that point, right, I'm done with this. Because like you said, I always knew I was going to get better. I just didn't know when it was going to be. And it was like, right, I really want to make this, I've got to put everything into this so that it can happen like as soon as as soon as it can, because I've given it 100%.
We'll be right back. I'm interrupting myself for a second to tell you about long COVID breathing. The fabulous Vicky Jones and I have teamed up to bring you long COVID breathing. We are both passionate about sharing our expertise and experience of the breath and how incredibly helpful that can be with long COVID. We've worked together to develop a course that is specifically tailored to those with long COVID. It's a 6-week course with 12 sessions, all delivered online. The community feel and learning that we're all sharing is such a joy. To find out more information and to sign up for our courses, workshops and other shorter sessions, please check out the link below, longcovidbreathing.com, or email longcovidbreathing@gmail.com to start your breathing journey with us. Yeah, and it's really interesting because I think, it's maybe through setting that boundary that we then set ourselves up to believe more. I don't know.
There was like a switch, I think. It was like it gave me this more determination, I think, is probably what I would say. And then I really delved into what boundaries do I need to put in place so that this can happen.
So it's like you're all in kind of thing, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Not nothing else matters, but this is definitely, I learned the bit where I was going to be able to put myself as the number one priority for this moment in time, for however long it takes. I am going to allow myself to be the top priority, and it worked. That's that I It's that determination, I think, that kind of, and that consistency, consistently doing it every day, asking myself that question of, is this going to help me heal? And being really I miss, it's, I dealt with a lot of um sadness and discomfort, and I felt like that FOMO a lot of the time because I was saying no, but I wouldn't change it now that I'm well. It kind of paid off.
Yeah, absolutely. It was worth it.
Yeah,
Um, I remember someone saying to me, and I can't remember who it was, um, but it's like if you have a goal, it's like what are you willing to give up in order to get there?
yeah,
Um, and that's something that only you can work out for
yeah,
yourself.
yeah,
And I think that is so true. But then, okay, then you say, right, well, I'm a single parent with three children and I struggle with finances. I don't have benefits. I don't have financial support. I have to work. Um,
yeah,
that sort of situation where you don't have support, you don't have any money that you can rely on, um, becomes much more difficult, I think, maybe in that situation to be able to put yourself first.
yeah. I feel that I was very privileged in that I did have like a partner that was able to support me, and I
Mm,
was able to get benefits that could help me as well. Admittedly, they're really hard to get, which is exhausting in the process, but that's a whole different topic. But I think even if you're in that kind of incredibly difficult position, even very small boundaries can still be really beneficial. Um, like knowing certain things, like, I don't know, for an example, I have a client I work with, and she's a single mum and everything, but at certain times she will, every day she will have a kind of her relaxation period at the end of the day. So she's there, she's in the house, and she does this certain like routine of like relaxation and stuff that is so beneficial for her. And that is a boundary that has kind of created, that is really beneficial. And that, even if it's 5 minutes, 2 minutes, whatever you can do, but something like that as a boundary. And then maybe once we start making a boundary and if you start that at 2 minutes, maybe you might be able to squeeze in 3 minutes one day. And just those tiny little steps will build up to the big leap in the end, because a big leap is just many, many, many little steps. And I think if you do lots of little steps, it's actually, especially when you have a dysregulated nervous system, those little steps don't upset the nervous system in any way, because it's able to just gradually get used to each of those little steps, rather than a big leap, which is upsetting for a nervous system. And then you often end up coming back quite considerably. So I think, yeah, even if you can only find a few minutes, just the concept of setting a boundary can be quite liberating, that you have given yourself those few minutes each day, that you're worth it just for that little bit of time.
yeah, I completely agree because I think again, we were saying just before we hit record how, I'm an all or nothing person. If it's not 100%, it's not worth doing. And I see this in
Yeah,
myself now, and I keep it a bit more under control than I used to, but it still sort of creeps out here and there. And I think as you say, in recovery, it's not about those big things. It's actually the big things come from the consistently setting the boundary, the consistently doing your 2 minutes of breathing a day, the consistently, whatever it is. It's that consistency that actually, yeah, maybe lots of smaller boundaries are actually much more powerful than one big one anyway. And it's going to be very different for different people as well, isn't it? It's like recoveries are never all going to be the same because everybody's body is different, everyone's situation is different. So it really is tailoring it to each individual person. What's going to work for you?
Yeah. And I think it is learning to really listen to yourself and your body and your mind and go, what do I need to be able to heal? It's that thing about, isn't it? Our bodies do have the ability to heal once we get out of the way and let them do it. And it's learning what things we can do to kind of step out of the way to let that healing happen.
Yeah, I'm kind of getting the image of like building a dam. And in order to build the dam to hold back the water, you've actually got to kind of move some of the water out of the way in order to build the dam, kind of thing. And it's, yeah,
Yeah.
I think maybe a boundary is holding back something to give yourself that space to heal, to use my water analogy.
But and I think sometimes it kind of almost feels that you do have to stop certain things for the move forward to happen. So there is stuff you have to kind of not give up, but put on hold maybe for a bit to let that boundary be able to kind of, if you're using a dam analogy, to have all the bricks so they can solidify and get into place, so that they become really strong, and then that will be solid. And then you get to the image, I guess, of like where little bits can come over the top of it and it can be okay, but it's not all going to gush over at once. So it will hold strong.
Yeah, I mean, it's that regulated nervous system, I suppose,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
That's able to handle what life throws at it, rather than crumble beneath it. Um, and I think, you kind of alluded to this earlier, and you think for me, certainly one of the hardest boundaries sometimes was holding myself back when I was feeling slightly better. So,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, I've got a bit of energy today. I'm going to use all of it, and then I would inevitably end up doing too much and then feeling like rubbish and then beating myself up about it. And, so setting that boundary of I don't have to use 100% of everything all the time. Um, and that just being completely alien to me because, of course, you would want to put 100% in because if you're not, you're being lazy. So that was a whole um, several therapy sessions, let's say.
And I think that as a boundary is probably one of the most beneficial boundaries to learn to put in place to stay well, because once you kind of say, oh, I'm recovered, there is still that part of you that is definitely within me, the striving part that will go and just keep pushing and keep pushing. And so learning the ability to almost hold yourself back. It's like you're on a horse with the reins, isn't it? And you've just got to hold it and hold it and hold it to stop it just galloping off at 100 miles an hour, and to kind of just hold it so that you don't burn out and use too much energy too soon.
Yes, and I think that for me was one of the hardest things, in some ways harder than saying no to things that I, sort of had to say no to. But you said, that like everything, it gets easier the more you do it. I remember the first time that I voluntarily said no to something. So this was after I'd recovered. So I didn't have to say no to this thing. I just remember thinking, no,
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. And I said no to it. And I was like, I wanted to stand up there and sort of flex my muscles and go, yeah, kind of thing. It was ridiculous. But I just remember it being this kind of like, because I'd never done that before, like literally never done it before in my life until I became unwell, where it, became a necessity. So yeah, I think it is something that gets easier, but it is hard.
For me, I was going to say on that point, I'm the same in that I found having children kind of before I had them, I was better at being stronger on my boundaries. And then having had children, and rightly or wrongly and stuff, but you end up giving a lot being a parent, and especially when they're little, you have to give up just because they need so much of you physically, that I really lost lots of boundaries, and I found they became so blurry, and I found it really hard to work out how to put boundaries back in place. And it was like I was having to remember, for me, how do you do boundaries again? Because it was like I spent this big chunk of time where they'd kind of all washed away. And so it was going, no, remember who you are, remember what you want, and you're not just a moment, you're, who are you? And I had to kind of go through that process again of remembering who I am, what do I want, and then learn how to boundary around that as well.
And I think, we go through this, not the same experience, obviously, but when we become unwell, we go from the version of us that existed beforehand into this unwell version. And it's like we have to work out who we are now. And it feels kind of governed, doesn't it, by this chaos that's going on in our body that we don't understand, and all of the kind of stuff around that. And as you say, it's kind of protecting your energy and your ability to recover. And okay, what does my body need, and how can I give it that? And then coming out of the illness is like the opposite experience, where you're like, who am I now? And how do I protect
Yes.
that? Because certainly I've not spoken to a single person who's recovered and they've said that they're the same person that they were before. And I think almost everyone says that they're a better person and they're a happier person, and all of that. But you are a very different person. So it's like you put on this whole new set of clothes and you have to work out which colors go together. Um, or maybe you a total clashing color person like me, but reds and pinks all together, absolutely. So it's this kind of practice of, and as you change, and I guess this is a process that we will all go through throughout life, illness or not. We change, don't we, as things happen to us, or we physically change as we age and different experiences happen. And we find that we need new boundaries or different boundaries. So it's this kind of like skill for life, isn't it? We learn it because we have to, but actually it's a really good one to kind of have in the bank.
And I think it's really important, that point of like how they change. It's like we can't be too rigid, it's like accepting that they will evolve, because life is continually evolving. And it's that skill of learning, once you learn how to put boundaries in place, learning that they can change and they can move slightly. And through recovery, like, the boundaries you may have when you're first starting recovery will be very different to the ones when you're nearing the end of recovery, because your tolerance will be greater, and you will have learned more and you will have more skills. So it's it's accepting that they don't need to stay the same, but it's just they need to be there in whatever form is protecting you and your energy for wherever you are in that part of your life.
We'll be right back.
Hey there, I'm just jumping in for a second to see if you're enjoying this episode. If you're finding it useful, maybe you would consider sharing it somewhere, a friend, a group, or even on your Twitter feed. If everyone was able to share just once, we'd be able to get this information out to even more people who really, really need it. So please consider sharing somewhere if you possibly can. I hope you enjoy the episode, and thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it comes back to the what are my needs, doesn't it? And that your needs do change,
Yes.
sometimes day to day, or certainly over longer periods of time. You don't always have the same requirements. So those boundaries do have to have some amount of flexibility, maybe more. And I suppose it comes back to sort of awareness of our needs, doesn't it? To be able to readjust those boundaries as we go through.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, what are the most kind of common barriers to setting boundaries? But I think we've sort of tackled that one, haven't we?
The biggest barrier, I think, is that learning how to deal, when we did cover this slightly, the discomfort and the guilt, and how that you setting a boundary for yourself can annoy other people. and to be okay that other people aren't so happy with this new boundary, because maybe you were the person that they went to and you always said yes, and they were like, oh, I'll go and ask Jules, she'll always say yes, she'll just do it for me. And by you saying no, they're now having to do that stuff themselves, or go to the effort of finding somebody else that will say yes. So there's a slight annoyance from them that, oh, this is more work for me now, that I have to work out how this work's going to get done. So it's just knowing that you sit that stuff out, and it will get easier once they kind of work out who this slightly different version of you is. And yeah, like the guilt, and they, I say, would be the kind of hurdles to setting your boundaries. And I guess you might set a boundary and it might need slight adjustment, and knowing that that's okay. Like, it's okay, it's not quite right, but I can just jiggle that slightly, and just have that trust within yourself that you can make those adjustments and it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And it guess it comes back to that sort of perfectionism thing that so many of us kind of suffer with, that actually try it out. And it's probably not going to be perfect the first time you do it,
Yeah.
but it will be something. And then, as you say, you can refine it.
Yeah.
I think one of the things, definitely the guilt over kind of like, I can't believe I'm saying no, I'm letting these people down, it's all my fault, I'm a failure, all of that. But certainly I always felt the need to over explain myself as well. I couldn't just say I can't do that. I would then have to give a million excuses and offer a load of alternatives and blah, 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 blah. And I can't remember who it was, or I would credit them. But apparently they have the saying in the States, and I don't know if it's everywhere, but certainly in parts of the States where it's like, that doesn't work for me. And I was like, that's so rude. How can you say that, without an explanation or whatever? And now I'm thinking, that's so on it, because you don't owe anyone an
Yeah.
explanation. You could say, I'm sorry, that doesn't work for me. But actually, that gets the message across, doesn't it? That doesn't work for me. I don't owe you an explanation, conversation over. It's like no is a complete sentence.
And exactly, and it's like the moment we start over explaining, it makes it so much harder to keep that boundary in place, because it gives them the ability to go, but what if you did that, what if maybe if you did, if you keep going with that, no, I'm sorry, that doesn't work for me, it doesn't give that open door to question it in any way, which in a sense is easier then than giving all those explanations.
Yeah, totally. Again, I have done that and it felt really, really uncomfortable. But I think, as you say, we sort of need to keep doing it. And it
Yeah.
does get easier, and we get better at identifying our needs and things, I think, as well. Because I definitely remember situations where I thought, well, I think I need to set some boundaries, but I don't really know what boundaries I need to set or how to do them, or, and it feels so overwhelming, doesn't it? To sort of, there's so many things. Where do I start?
Yeah, and I think sometimes that can be if asking maybe people that you really trust about, like, I'm aware that I need to put some boundaries in place, but I'm really struggling. Have you got any suggestions of how that might help? Because it can be, if it's like such a new phenomenon to you to set boundaries, it's like, where do I start? So if you have those kind of trusted people that will have got your back and are going to be, honest with you, to maybe ask for that kind of help from them.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. And you know what? There's something quite vulnerable about that, isn't it? Because it feels like asking for help. And I think also sometimes that vulnerability can lead to greater connection. So you can almost say, I'm really struggling. I don't really know what to do here, but I know I need to do something. Can you, help me work this out? And actually, rather than you becoming more of a burden, you actually maybe foster that greater connection. Plus, you get your needs met. So it could actually be a nicer outcome to have come from that, even though it came from a position of, you know, kind of thing. So just to finish, I suppose, if you had like maybe one tip or two tips, you can have two if you need them. What would be your kind of like top tips for where to start with setting boundaries?
I think it's those areas maybe of your life that you feel, if I could do a tweak in this area, it would have the biggest impact on my energy or my recovery if I tweaked this bit here. Because I think we mostly have a sense of things, the activities we do or the interactions we have that are the most energy depleting. And the ones that are most energy depleting, I would say, is a good sign of where you definitely would be the best place to start with a boundary. So yeah, I would look at the things that you do in your life that deplete your energy the most, and maybe start there, because also you will get the biggest bonus from doing that. So I think that's probably where I would say to start.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, biggest bang for your buck. Um,
Yeah.
then once you've sort of cleared the decks a little bit, then you're able to start to see a little bit more what else is going on and maybe where some of those other boundaries need to go in. Yeah, absolutely. Jules, thank you so much. This has been really fun, catching up again. And actually, I've learned loads as well because I've just realized how many more boundaries I need in my life. So, thank you so much for sharing. And I think there's been loads of really helpful stuff here. So,
Thank you. It's been so lovely to chat again. And I haven't got it all sorted. I still need to keep having this refresh. So it's been great having this conversation because, as we were saying before, my life has been really busy recently. And I think I need to do a kind of check of where my boundaries are and to just double check that I've got them where they need to be. So thank you for the refresh.
I think we're both away to do a boundary audit, aren't we? So,
Yeah.
Thank you so much to all of my guests and to you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it, or at least found it useful. The Long COVID podcast is entirely self-produced and self-funded. I'm doing all of this myself. If you're able to, please go to buymeacoffee.com/longcovidpod to help me cover the costs of hosting the podcast. Please look out for the next episode of the Long COVID podcast. It's available on all the usual podcast hosting things. And do get in touch. I'd love to hear